Welcome to Dark Whispers. The Appalachian Mountains stretch endlessly, cloaked in dense fog, twisted trees, and shadows that seem alive. Locals warn travelers. Some roads are better left untraveled, and some stories are never meant to be told. Tonight, we explore 8 true encounters that will haunt your mind long after the last word. If you value your peace of mind, maybe you shouldn't read further. But if curiosity binds you, brace yourself. The mountains are awake, and they remember. Our first story begins in the small town of Cerrado, West Virginia. In the late summer of 1987, a group of hikers set out for a weekend trek through the unmarked trails near Canal Forest. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp soil, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. As night fell, an unnatural fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. One hiker, Mark, reported seeing figures moving silently among the trees, faces obscured, their eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. At first, the group assumed it was other hikers or local hunters, but the shapes followed them for hours, appearing wherever they turned, vanishing when approached. By dawn, Mark's friends found him standing on a cliff edge, frozen, whispering a name none of them recognized. Eliakim. When they tried to get him to speak, he would only mutter incoherent phrases. Weeks later, Mark vanished completely. Only his footprints remained, leading off the cliff, but there was no evidence he had fallen. Locals say that on foggy nights, you can still hear a whisper echoing from the cliff. Eliakim. In North Carolina, near the Blue Ridge Parkway, another traveler, Sarah, recounted an encounter on a foggy autumn night in 1994. She and her friends were camping near an old logging trail, a place locals warned was haunted by the whispering logger. The woods were silent, yet they heard the distant sound of an axe chopping wood, uneven and deliberate. When Sarah approached the sound, she discovered a blood-stained axe embedded in a tree, yet there was no one there. As she turned to leave, a cold breath brushed her neck, and a whisper, coarse and guttural, reached her ear. "You shouldn't be here." A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, towering, humanoid, yet moving with unnatural speed. Sarah and her friends fled, leaving all their gear behind. She claims to this day that the figure sometimes appears in her dreams, standing silently at the edge of a dark forest, watching. In the heart of Tennessee, the story of the Smoky Hollow cabin is a cautionary tale that even seasoned hunters avoid. In 2002, a couple, Jason and Lily, purchased a cabin for a quiet retreat. Within the first night, they heard footsteps pace in the attic, though the space above was empty. Old photographs in the cabin depicted previous owners, all of whom had disappeared mysteriously. One night, Jason awoke to see a figure sitting on the edge of the bed, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. Its voice was like grinding stone. "The mountains remember." Days later, Jason wandered into the forest, drawn by an unseen force, until Lily's desperate screams brought him back. They abandoned the cabin within a week. Locals say the cabin waits for new occupants, and the shadow in the hood never leaves. In Virginia, near the abandoned coal mines of Buchanan County, a lone miner named Thomas reported hearing voices from deep within the shafts, calling his name in a melodic chant. At first, he thought it was hallucination, the result of isolation underground. But the whispers grew louder, commanding him to enter deeper tunnels he had never explored. Thomas ventured into an uncharted cavern and discovered ancient symbols carved into the rock, radiating a cold, unnatural energy. He stumbled out hours later, claiming to have seen faceless miners, countless in number, working tirelessly, their eyes glowing like embers. He never returned underground. Locals believe the cavern leads to an underground realm, a world parallel to ours, where the dead continue their labor, bound to the mountain's memory. In Kentucky, a teenager named Emily went hiking near the Daniel Boone National Forest in 1998. She wandered off the main trail and discovered an abandoned cabin hidden beneath overgrown ivy. Inside, she found old journals filled with frantic writings describing encounters with shadowy figures. The entries became progressively more disturbing, ending abruptly with the phrase, "They know you are here." That night, Emily heard tapping on her tent and whispers in the wind, calling her name. She fled, only to find the trail she had followed had vanished. For days, locals searched, eventually finding her at the edge of the forest, dazed and refusing to explain what had occurred. Emily claimed the forest itself had shifted around her, guiding her deeper into its heart. In West Virginia, near the town of Bramwell, a man named Henry recounted an encounter in 2005 while exploring abandoned mining tunnels. As he descended into the dark, he found himself surrounded by glowing figures, miners without faces, whispering in a language he could not understand. Panic gripped him, yet he felt compelled to follow them deeper into the tunnel. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed meaningless. When he finally emerged, the sun had not risen and his watch had stopped. The townsfolk warned that the mines are cursed, inhabited by spirits trapped between worlds, waiting for the living to wander too far. In Tennessee, a group of teenagers near the Great Smoky Mountains in 2010 dared each other to spend a night in an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Gatlinburg. One of them, Chris, disappeared at midnight. The remaining teens heard footsteps, low moaning, and a child's laughter echoing down the hallways. They fled, leaving Chris behind, and only found him days later at the edge of the forest, incoherent, muttering about the lady in white who had led him into a room with mirrors that reflected not their faces, but their fears. Finally, in North Carolina, near an old section of the Appalachian Trail, hikers discover a series of wooden effigies, each carved with grotesque faces and eyes inlaid with polished stones. At night, they heard chanting in the woods, rhythmic and hypnotic. One hiker, David, claimed he was drawn toward the effigies, unable to resist, until a sudden gust of wind knocked him to the ground. The next morning, the effigies were gone, and the trail seemed to stretch farther than it had before, as if the forest itself had grown overnight. These 8 encounters share one terrifying truth. The Appalachian Mountains are alive with memory, shadow, and something beyond human understanding. Even now, as you read these words, the fog might be creeping closer, the wind carrying whispers of forgotten names. The mountains watch, and they remember. The darkness of the Appalachian Mountains is not merely the absence of light. It is a presence, ancient and patient, watching all who wander within. After hearing the first tales of Kanawha Forest, the Blue Ridge Parkway, Smoky Hollow Cabin, and the haunted mines, you may think the horrors end there. But the mountains hold secrets far deeper, and tonight we journey into encounters that defy explanation, where the living and forgotten brush against one another in ways that chill the soul. In West Virginia, near the twisted hollows of the Tug Fork River, a man named Leonard recounted a chilling encounter in 1996. While fishing along the riverbank at dusk, he saw a figure standing waist-deep in the water, perfectly still. At first, he thought it was a deer or some local animal, but as he approached, the figure turned slowly. Its face was pale, featureless except for 2 dark voids where eyes should have been. Leonard froze, unable to look away as the figure raised its arm and pointed toward the forest, and then, with unnatural speed, it sank beneath the water without a ripple. Terrified, he fled, only to discover days later that local records contain a report of a missing fisherman from that very spot, dated exactly 50 years prior. In Tennessee, deep in the backwoods near the Cherokee National Forest, a small hunting party in 2004 reported hearing children singing in the trees at midnight. Curious, they followed the melody and stumbled upon a clearing filled with small wooden figures, each carved to resemble a child, some twisted into grotesque shapes. One of the hunters, David, touched one of the figures and immediately felt an icy grip around his chest, as if invisible hands were holding him. The group fled, leaving their campsite behind, and when they returned weeks later, the clearing had vanished completely, replaced by dense, impenetrable thickets. Locals whisper that the forest collects trespassers, reshaping its boundaries to trap the unwary. In North Carolina, near Mount Mitchell, a young couple on a late-night hike in 2011 encountered an abandoned shack hidden in the mist. Inside, the walls were covered with hundreds of small scratches, almost like tally marks counting something, or someone. As they explored, the floorboards groaned under invisible weight, and a cold wind carried whispers. Leave before it is too late. When they tried to leave, the trail behind them appeared different. Trees were denser, the path longer, and no matter how far they walked, the shack seemed always just ahead, waiting, patient and silent. Only by retracing their exact steps in reverse, guided by fading moonlight, did they finally escape. But the experience haunted their dreams for years. In them, the shack appeared again, calling their names, as if the forest itself had remembered them. In Kentucky, the story of the Hollow Creek Road is a warning repeated by locals to anyone who ventures out at night. In 2009, a delivery driver named Michael reported his truck stalling in the middle of a remote stretch. As he stepped out to investigate, the road seemed to stretch endlessly, the headlights illuminating shadowy figures standing motionless along the roadside. Panicked, he tried to start the truck, but it wouldn't budge. Then, from the trees came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling him. He sprinted into the cab, finally getting the engine to roar to life, only to look in the rearview mirror and see the figures vanish, leaving only deep impressions in the dirt that were too large to be human. Local lore claims the figures are guardians of the old roads, remnants of miners and settlers who never left, punishing those who wander after dark. In Virginia, a man named Samuel explored the abandoned bird estate near the Appalachian Trail in 2013. The mansion, decaying and overgrown, was said to be cursed after fire consumed the family decades earlier. Samuel reported hearing faint piano music echoing to the halls, though no piano remained. Doors slammed on their own, and portraits seemed to shift, following his movement. In the attic, he discovered a diary written in a hand that wasn't human, describing rituals to summon shadows from the mountains, instructions that concluded with, "Only the lost may return." That night, Samuel awoke to see a tall, cloaked figure standing at the foot of his sleeping bag, its head tilted unnaturally, whispering his name. When he screamed, it vanished, but the whispers continued in his mind for weeks afterward. The penultimate story comes from Tennessee, along the trail to Clingman's Dome in 2016. A solo hiker, Jennifer, reported hearing footsteps that matched her own, yet never seeing anyone nearby. At one point, she turned and saw her own shadow moving independently, stretching and writhing as if alive. Panicked, she ran, tripping and falling into a small hollow. When she looked up, the trees around her had shifted positions. The landscape itself seemed twisting, breathing, watching. By sheer luck, she found a familiar trail the next morning. Locals claim these phenomena occur when the mountains themselves reject intruders, bending reality to confuse and terrify them. Finally, in West Virginia, near the backwoods of McDowell County, a group of campers in 2018 stumbled across an ancient stone circle, overgrown and hidden deep in the forest. That night, the air grew unnaturally cold, and strange lights danced among the trees. One camper, Alan, disappeared briefly into the woods, returning hours later dazed and speaking in a voice that wasn't his own, recounting visions of shadowed figures performing rituals under a blood-red moon. The group fled, abandoning their campsite, and when authorities investigated, no trace of Alan's footsteps could be found, except for his footprints inside the stone circle, leading outward, though he had entered from the opposite side. Locals claim the circle is a doorway to something ancient, a remnant of the old Appalachian spirits that dwell far beyond human comprehension. These stories share one unmistakable truth. The Appalachian Mountains are not merely landscapes of rock and trees. They are living, remembering entities, harboring memories of the lost, the departed, and the shadows that never leave. Those who wander carelessly through these mountains may find themselves witnesses to things that refuse to be forgotten, watched by eyes that were never meant to exist. And so, as you read these tales tonight, remember, the fog may be creeping closer, the wind may carry whispers of forgotten names, and the mountains are always awake, waiting, watching, and they remember.